Welcome to True Crime Bites, Death Row and Executions, where we honor lives lost and revisit the final chapters of those who crossed the line. On November 13, 2025 at Florida State Prison, Bryan Fredrick Jennings is scheduled to die by lethal injection. It's been more than 4 decades since the brutal crime that brought him here. A crime that ripped through a quiet Merritt Island neighborhood and left behind a family shattered by grief. The name most people remember from this case isn't his, though. It's the name of a little girl, Rebecca Kunash. Rebecca, or Becky as her family called her, was just 6 years old in May of 1979. She lived with her parents and siblings on Merritt Island, a place where kids played barefoot in the grass and parents left their doors unlocked. She had long brown hair and a bright, curious smile. The kind of child who never met a stranger. Her teachers remembered her as cheerful and imaginative. Her parents described her as gentle but brave, the kind of little girl who stood up for her friends. But on the night of May 10, 1979, that sense of safety was stolen. Becky was asleep in her bed when Bryan Jennings, a 20-year-old Marine on leave, broke into the Kunash home through her bedroom window. He carried her out of the house without a sound. What followed was one of the most horrifying crimes Florida had seen. Jennings took her to a remote canal area on Merritt Island, where he sexually assaulted her, beat her so severely that her skull was fractured, and then drowned her in the canal to silence her forever. Her body was found later that morning, bruised, broken, and lying in shallow water. The community was stunned. People who had never locked their doors suddenly slept with shotguns beside their beds. Police flooded the area, following a trail that quickly pointed to Jennings. He had been stopped for a traffic violation later that same day, and investigators soon linked him to Becky's abduction through physical evidence and witness statements. The arrest came swiftly, but the justice that followed would stretch across generations. Jennings was convicted of first-degree murder, sexual battery, and kidnapping in 1980. The jury took little time to recommend death, and the judge agreed. But appeals followed almost immediately. His conviction was overturned on procedural grounds. He was retried in 1982, convicted again, and once again sentenced to die. More appeals came, challenges to jury instructions, questions about venue, and claims of ineffective counsel. Each appeal brought Becky's family back into court, forced to relive the unbearable details of what had happened to their daughter. By 1986, after a third trial, another jury reaffirmed the sentence. Jennings was sent back to Florida's death row, where he would remain for nearly 40 years. During that time, the world changed outside those walls. New governors, new laws, new faces. But for the Kunash family, time seemed frozen. Every appeal, every delay, every news headline brought their grief back to life. Rebecca's parents have spoken publicly only rarely, but court records and statements show the depth of their pain. They describe their daughter as a loving, happy child who was taken from them in the worst way imaginable. Her mother once said that Becky's absence was like a missing heartbeat in their home, that they'd never again celebrate a birthday or Christmas without thinking of her empty chair. Bryan Jennings, now 66 years old, has continued to maintain that his trial was unfair. His defense attorneys have filed multiple last-minute motions, asking for a stay of execution, citing issues with clemency procedures and legal representation. Florida officials, however, maintain that he has received full due process after more than 4 decades of litigation. Governor Ron DeSantis signed the death warrant in October 2025, setting the execution for November 13th. It will be Florida's 16th execution of the year, a number that ties the modern record for the state. For prosecutors and those who work the case, The upcoming execution marks what they see as long-delayed justice. One former prosecutor called the murder one of the most heinous crimes I ever handled and said the details still haunted him decades later. Investigators who were young officers at the time are now in their 70s, yet they can still recall the morning they found Becky's body in the canal, the silence, the water barely rippling, and the horror of realizing that the search for a missing child had become a murder scene. To this day, Merritt Island residents who lived there in 1979 remember the case vividly. It became one of those stories parents whispered to their kids as a warning about trust, about doors left unlocked, about monsters who sometimes look like ordinary men. In the years since, Becky's family has worked quietly to preserve her memory. There's no grand foundation or media campaign, just a family who never stopped loving the little girl who never came home. Her story became a reminder that even in a world full of trials and appeals, time doesn't soften certain wounds. On the night of November 13th, when the clock strikes 6 and the execution chamber lights dim, Bryan Jennings will face what the state calls justice. For the Kunash family, it's not closure, because nothing could truly close the space Becky once filled. But it's an ending, one that's been waiting nearly half a century to arrive. Rebecca's story is a tragic reminder that behind every court date, every headline, and every death warrant, there's a name worth remembering. Hers was Becky, a 6-year-old girl who should have grown up, gone to school dances, fallen in love, and had children of her own. Instead, she became the face of one of Florida's longest-running death penalty cases. And as the state prepares to carry out Bryan Jennings' sentence, it's her light, not his crime, that deserves to be remembered. Thank you for watching. If you found this video meaningful, please give it a like. It helps more people discover these important stories. Subscribe to the channel for more true crime cases, last words, and final moments from death row. And as always, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.